Hey nature photographers, it is Lee Hoy, your generally friendly OM system and Photo Pro ambassador. I'm excited to see you again on another Sunday. Maybe before you watch this video, if it's Sunday morning, hop over to Rob Treck's 8th annual Micro Four Thirds gathering or meetup. I'm on the panel today, February 15th. It starts, I believe, 8 a.m. Central, 9 a.m. Eastern, and got a great panel of photographers. I look forward to being there. And then you can come back and check out this video if you like. I also still have 2 spaces on my Mastering Hummingbird photography workshop here in the Davis Mountains coming up later this summer. I have spaces on my Brazil macro photography, my South Texas introduction to macro photography. I have some spaces on my mentorship program for mastering the OM1, the OM1 Mark II, and the OM3. I am going to include the OM3 in the OM System mentorship program, and I still have spaces on my Mastering Post-Processing mentorship program. So hop over to my website, leehoyphotography.com, and take a look at some of those opportunities. Well, one thing I notice in the field when leading workshops or out photographing in general, I often hear this phrase from clients: something's wrong with my autofocus. Well, I'll just be honest, it is rarely a problem with the camera. But in fairness to photographers, on our OM system cameras, there are a couple of ways to quickly change autofocus. You know what the challenge is? Sometimes those lead to autofocus headaches because you can change it inadvertently. So there's a couple of tips I'm going to give you today on how to avoid autofocus headaches when using the OM1, the OM1 Mark II, or the OM3. Because there are a few things that may seem very convenient, but they're likely to cause you some grief. Stay tuned. We'll be right back and talk about it. Well, how often have you been photographing out in the field, especially with wildlife? Because wildlife, you got to be Johnny on the spot, right? You don't have time to dilly-daddle, fiddle-fart around. How often have you gone to photograph and suddenly you realize that you're on the wrong autofocus mode, or you're on the wrong, especially the wrong autofocus target mode? Target mode is what is the autofocus target points, okay? And what you don't realize is there are a couple of things in the camera, a couple of controls and features that can help you change your autofocus mode quickly, but frankly, some of them are too easy to inadvertently do without ever being aware of it. So I'm going to give you a couple of tips. We're going to hop into the menu, and for some reason, my display is a little bit blurry today with the menu. So let's hop into the menu. I apologize for a little bit of blurriness. It may be a cord that I have to replace or something, and I just replaced a cord, so we'll see. But when it comes to changing your autofocus points inadvertently, one of the biggest problems is the multi-selector or the joystick. Now, I love the joystick. The multi-selector is what OM calls it. Having grown up playing video games, it's a joystick, right? But did you know that the joystick, when pushed in, functions as a button? And it can be set up to either allow you to change autofocus points or to create what's called a set home autofocus. You might think of it as an oh crap autofocus recovery button, where if for some reason things aren't what they should be, you can press in the joystick and it will return to the designated autofocus mode and autofocus point configuration and location where you want it. But here's the thing. Pressing in the joystick is way easier than you think. If you're trying to move your autofocus point around, or you're moving the joystick, or you're reaching, and your thumb is on the AF on button, it's overlapping a little bit with the joystick. So you regularly press that in without realizing it, especially when wearing gloves. So what I recommend, if you find yourself, and this is just one of the things I'm going to talk about today, if you find yourself regularly moving to an autofocus point you don't want, you got a couple of things you can do. You're going to go to the custom menu, which is the gear. You're going to go to page 1, operations, and go to this multi-selector settings. You're going to press OK, and see this center button? It has 3 settings. One is off, which is what I recommend if you tend to press this in inadvertently. I don't need it to change autofocus points quickly. I will show you what I like to do. You can press it in and select the autofocus target point in autofocus target mode. And here's where things go wrong. If you have it set up to this, and again, it seems very convenient. I'm going to set that to on. So when I press in the joystick, this pops up. Well, oftentimes you don't really notice this, and you go to change your shutter speed or your ISO, and what you're doing is changing your autofocus point. And you may not even realize it, because as soon as you press the shutter button, it disappears. Now my autofocus point is not correct, and that's a problem, okay? Again, all I'm doing is barely pressing on the multi-selector, and look at that, it comes up. I mean, just barely. More than, it doesn't take much, okay? Even just moving the camera around in my hand, you can push it in. And again, you're going to start spinning when you do that, and then you're spinning trying to adjust a setting. You don't even realize you've changed your autofocus point. This happens all the time to clients, okay? So under the multi-selector settings, there's this one. If you don't tend to inadvertently press in the multi-selector, well, it's not a bad idea, but I'm going to charge you. You probably don't shoot in gloves. And you're probably not that active with the camera, because it just happens all too often. Now, this is the other setting, which is the home setting. And home is what you could set it up for, would be what autofocus mode and point do you tend to use the most. So here under autofocus on page 6 is set home. You'll notice mine are unchecked because I don't want to use them. Okay? And you would go over here, and for each of the 3 orientations, horizontal, vertical grip up, vertical grip down, you could set your desired autofocus point, okay? By the way, single is too small for everything but macro, all right? So you'll notice mine are unchecked. I don't want to use set home. Now, if you're one of those photographers that only ever uses one autofocus point configuration, which is a really bad idea, but if you do, then you could choose to set home to that one, and it'll always be what you want. But I will tell you, there is no such thing as a universal autofocus target point configuration that is going to work for wildlife, landscape, nights. It just doesn't. So if you're one of those photographers, you're just being obstinate, not wanting to learn, and wanting one size fits all. Photography is a really bad place for one size fits all. It may work well for hats, but not if you have a Charlie Brown size head, okay? So that's set home. So what we want to do is make sure, if you're inadvertently pressing that, this needs to be off, okay? Now what I do use for changing autofocus points, if I want to completely change configuration versus what I have on the FN lever, is the directional pad. I don't tend to hit the directional pad inadvertently, okay? So that is what I use, is the directional pad. Notice if I press the directional pad, my autofocus target mode selector screen pops up. All right? So I don't like the multi-selector as a button. Turn that off. But here's another tip that you can use to minimize inadvertently selecting target point configurations that you don't want. When you're programming a custom mode, this is an OM1 Mark II, so this is going to be on page 6 for OM1. I believe it's on page 5, target mode settings. All right. You're going to go in here, and you are going to uncheck all the ones that you won't use. That way, when you are cycling through the options, so when I go here, this is a custom mode for landscape. There's the regular small, which you cannot uncheck or disable small. It's not an option. This is what I use with AI subject detection for wildlife. Most of the time, that's the one I use most of the time. All right. And then there's a custom small box I've created for AI subject detection or CAF or CAF plus tracking when I'm not using subject detection. You don't use AI subject detection and CAF tracking together. All right. So disable in any custom mode. So here I would disable my landscape points, and I would just have the 2 that I use for wildlife. And again, small will always be an option. You'll notice I can't disable small. So now when I go in to try to change autofocus points, I only have 3 options. I'm not likely to pick one I don't need. If this were a landscape custom mode that I'd programmed, well, I'd go in here. I would uncheck C1, C2, and I would use my custom modes here. And I've made a little modification of these lines. They're now this, okay? Just to make it a little easier to move around the screen. And they're now this. Oops, just a little bit shorter, 19. That's what I like now, okay? So you'll notice I'm not gonna have anything else checked, okay? So that way if I were to inadvertently hit the directional pad, I only have small and my 2 custom ones to choose from. It also makes it much quicker to get to the autofocus point mode that you want, or target mode is what they're technically called. Those are things that people do where they accidentally change their autofocus mode out in the field all the time. When you use that multi-selector as a button, it's just going to create headaches with autofocus because you're accidentally going to change your autofocus point configurations. Maybe try the directional pad, and then in the autofocus menu, page 6 for OM1 Mark II, page 5 for the OM1, disable all the autofocus point modes, target modes you don't need for that genre of photography. And this is going to reduce your autofocus headaches in the field. It's going to let you focus on the fun things about nature photography instead of fighting your gear, okay? So I hope those 2 tips help on reducing your autofocus headaches, because I know beginner and intermediates, it's hard enough when you're trying to learn exposure and animal behavior and field craft and post-processing and which lens should you own. And then you finally get in the field and something exciting's happening, and then you're not on the correct autofocus target mode. Don't let that be a frustration. Program your camera to eliminate those frustrations. I hope you enjoy these tips, guys. I thank you for being a part of my online community, and I will continue to hopefully produce some very educational, informative material for you. Y'all get out there, go capture some visually compelling images. We'll see you later. And go to the Texas bar so they can have a real Texan there, by God. We're going to have a good time. We'll talk to y'all later. Say ciao.
Ciao.